Hello, welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love hosted by Richard Osler. We have a mother and daughter team on the podcast today, Kari Bates and her daughter, Kimberly Bates. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
These two women host a podcast called Coffee and Cocoa. And it's the story about an active LDS mom with 6 adult children. That's Kari, and all of her children have left the church. And that's a kind of a difficult road for LDS parents. We're walking that road. We have 6 kids, and many of our kids have left the church. And she's doing this podcast with her daughter, Kimberly, who's joining us from New York City. She's in HR at a really cool company that I love. And Kari's joining us from her home in Elko, Nevada. And they've started a podcast just to talk about how to keep the relationships together when adult children leave the church. And that's so needed. And I listened to one of their episodes, and I love how they're role modeling this in their own story and just sharing how to build bridges and how to keep the relationship together. One of the things that Kari sent me in the email, and I'll read this, we want to talk about how we rebuilt and maintain our relationship in spite of the fact that all of our kids, including Kimberly, who's on the podcast, have left the church. I'm still in the church. We want to share principles for building relationships across dividing lines and why it's so important now in our world when things are so divided. So holy cow, is that needed? We will link to their podcast. They've done about 15 episodes. It's called Coffee and Cocoa. Just check out the show notes to listen to this podcast. Kari is a life coach for LDS moms that have children that have left the church, including queer children. That's part of the Bates' story. They have some kids that identify as queer. And so she's just really good at this space as a life coach. We'll put her Instagram account in the show notes. You can DM her on Instagram. Anyway, but we just hope and pray. We said a prayer before we started. This will be helpful for you. Maybe if you've left the church and you're trying to help rebuild or keep a relationship with your parents, this will help you. Or parents, this will help you. Or any of us that are just trying to maintain relationships with people that believe religiously or politically in other ways that are different than us. And that's so needed. And so instead of just theoretically talking about we need to love each other, these two women are bravely stepping forward and showing how they're doing that in the Bates family. So I'm really honored to have them on the podcast. And with that, I'll kind of quit talking and done my little introduction and turn it over to Kari Bates from Elko, Nevada, the mom, and Kimberly Bates, the daughter in New York.
Thank you. And I wanted to say too, I just have appreciated your podcast so much and other people who have stepped into this space because people's stories are so important, right? We can believe things and we can have really firm testimonies of principles, and that as long as they work well in our life, and then sometimes when those things stop working, it can be really difficult, and it can be really difficult to change your mind about something when it's still working for you until you hear somebody's story that it's not working for anymore, right? And that's definitely been a lot of my experience is that, I grew up in the church in the 80s in, right in the center of Mormondom, as we would have called it then. And I still use the word Mormon a lot. So I hope that's not too big of a
just fine.
But the church just always worked so well for me. All the way growing up, it was just my safe place. It was my family's safe place. And it was just built for my life. We were just kind of a middle class family and white family, and had a lot of privilege in those ways. And everything just worked so well. We had both sets of my grandparents had moved from Utah, I have pioneer ancestry on both sides, but both sets of my grandparents had moved to Southern Nevada for work. and they had raised their families there. And so I had all of my aunts and uncles and cousins, and everybody was very firmly in the church. Very, it was just one of these big Mormon families that we just had. It was such a beautiful way to grow up, and I loved it so much. And the church in the 80s was so fun, right? You're a little bit older than me, but it was just a great time. We had road shows and church dances and girls camp, and it just seemed like life just revolved around the church, right? Everything had to do with the church. Was that your experience too?
Very much so. It's great.
Yeah. And it was like, I remember thinking as a teenager, because we always have this kind of narrative of being persecuted, that we're going to be persecuted and people are going to hate us. And I just remember thinking, why would that ever happen? This is so great and so wonderful. And, not that my life was perfect or anything like that, but it really was just a very idyllic way to grow up. And so of course, as I grew up, then that's what I wanted for my family too. I went to school to be a teacher because that was the closest degree that I could get to being a mom, right? And then met my husband at school, and we just he was actually the family home evening dad, and I was the family home evening mom. So I like to say that we had an arranged marriage. But and we just dove in and started having kids right away. We had 6 kids in rapid succession, 6 kids in 10 years, basically. And just were raising them in the church and loving how that went. He was the bishop he became the bishop. How old were you, Kimberly, when he became the bishop?
I was 11 when he became bishop.
You were 11. And he was, so from the time you were 11 to about 17, 18?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So most of her teenage years, he was the bishop. And, and it was just, and I, like in college, I had a little bit of an experience where I didn't go to church for a while and just kind of experimented with some things. And that was such a bad experience that I was just like, get right back in the church, right back on the path. And that was before I married my husband and stuff. So, so like I said, it just always really, really worked well for me. And I had hoped that, Kimberly, when she was a teenager, was a little bit rebellious and stuff, but I had also been a little bit rebellious and had some fights with my mom. And so in my mind, it was always just like, oh, she'll come around. She'll come, she doesn't like me right now, but she'll come back to the church and she'll change her mind about all of these things. And her experience was different than that. So do you want to talk about your experience?
Well, I was also raised in the church, obviously. My parents were very staunch about following the church rules. So we really observed the Sabbath day. We went to church as a family. It was very important. We watched our parents do tithing settlement and be full tithe payers. We did fast Sundays together. We were as perfect as they say you should be. We really tried. And I think for me, when I started rebelling, I felt like I wasn't fitting into that anymore. Like my mom said, my dad was bishop from the time that I was 11 to 17, which is just the worst time for him to be a bishop. For me personally, I think he was served the ward as best as he could, but that was a time where I was put into a position of really being seen by the ward and really judged by the ward. There were things that happened, like moms printed out Facebook posts that I had made and gave them to my parents and were like, your daughter's being promiscuous on Facebook, when it was just like a picture of me in class with my friend. And it just made me always feel like I couldn't do good enough. Like I was always the bad kid, even though I was doing all of the right things. Another big part of my story was that I didn't strictly date Mormon boys. So when I turned 16, I was doing the thing where I dated someone and then dated somebody else and then dated that person again, so that I wasn't singling off with one person. I was being very chaste and very responsible in those relationships, the way the church had taught me. But then I started dating a non-Mormon boy, and it seemed like as soon as I did that, my virginity came into question, my chastity came into question, and there was a lot of speculation around it. And quite honestly, from my parents too, that just made me feel like, even though I'm doing the right things, I'm still feeling like the bad kid all the time. And that really put me in a spot where it wasn't working for me. And then I started questioning things. So the year that I was a senior in high school was the 2014 to 2015 school year. And we were studying DNC, and that's also where the church published the Rock in the Hat and started talking about the translation of the Book of Mormon. And that really rocked my world. At the same time, I started dating someone who wasn't white, and that became a problem to some Mormons. And I had to pull up the page that showed that the church actually rolled back their ruling that interracial couples couldn't get sealed in the temple. And they changed that in 1994. But then I knew that up until 1994, I wouldn't have been able to be sealed to the temple to someone who wasn't also white. And that really rocked my world. And then also, I had some inklings that my siblings weren't straight. And I also had some friends that weren't straight. And I was starting to question the proclamation to the world and the church's stance on the gay community. And all of this really, they talk about it adding to your shelf, and it did break my shelf, and I decided to step away. And I was the first child in my family, and on one side of my family, the first cousin to really openly step away from the church. So not dismissively, be like, oh, I'm going to go back to the temple eventually or anything like that. I said, I'm not going to be in the church anymore. And it was so scary. I thought I was going to lose my whole family. I thought that nobody was going to love me anymore except me. And I also really struggled with feeling like my family wasn't ever going to love me for me. They were always going to love the potential of who I could be in the church, and that I was always going to be ministered to when I was with them. And my mom and I's story is not perfect. We fought a lot those first years of, the years of me in high school, where I was rebelling and where I was also mad at my parents for questioning who I was so much and questioning things like if I was following the rules that I was actively following, or, making things worse when I wasn't following them. Through that time, we had a lot of turmoil, but also when I stepped away, there was a lot of turmoil. So Mom, do you want to talk a little bit about how that felt on your end?
Yeah. That was just really, when my kids started leaving the church, it just felt like my entire foundation crumbled, right? Because as a Mormon mom, I felt like it was my fault, right? Like, what didn't I do right? And what had we missed? Was it that family home evening that we'd missed? Was it that we hadn't said scripture or said prayers and scriptures and that we hadn't been strict enough, which definitely wasn't true because we were pretty strict. And it was just like I had said, it had worked for me so well for all of my life. To have it not work for my kids was just completely cracked my foundation, and I couldn't. And it really broke me for a while. Like I had some pretty serious depression over it, and some pretty some difficult years there, as especially as my oldest three were leaving. And so I think, this is when other people's stories really became important, right? Because up until this point in my life, it had always been kind of, like my feeling had always just been, if you live the gospel, your life will turn out the way it's supposed to be, right? Like I had just always believed that. And so when other people had problems, it wasn't like I wouldn't have said I was judgmental of them or anything like that, but it would have been, I would have felt like if you would just live the gospel, you wouldn't have those problems. And then when we had tried so hard and worked so hard to do all of those things right, and it wasn't working anymore, it just opened my eyes so much to all of these people that were trying so hard and it just wasn't working for them, and I could really like it. I could empathize and felt so sorry for all of these people that I mean, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't have said I was judging them, but I was definitely judging them, And so that became a thing where I just really started looking at people's stories more. And also I a little ways into this journey, I found a life coach. I started talking to Jody Moore.
That's great.
And do you know who Jody Moore is?
Yeah.
She was just barely getting started at the time. And she became my life coach. And she taught me so much about how our stories work, how things don't actually have meaning until we give them meaning. And that's like where our agency comes in, is that the meaning that we give to things. And all my life, I had just been accepting the meanings that had been handed to me, right? That I had been accepting everything that the church said because the church was true and we had a living prophet, and accepting everything that was in the church was good, and everything that was outside of the church was maybe not bad, but a little bit suspicious, right? And so she helped me so much. And as I was listening to these other people's stories and their other experiences, just my eyes started to be open to ways that I didn't believe everything that I had always been taught, and ways that some of these things were just cultural, and ways that some of these things were not actually even things that the church taught, but things that we had kind of picked up and interpreted amongst ourselves at church. Because people a lot of times say, like, the church taught me. Well, the church is just a conglomeration of people, right? And we pass these stories from one to another until they become part of our collective groupthink. But a lot of those things aren't actually really doctrine at all. And so, and even some of the things that are and have been doctrine, we, like the priesthood ban was absolutely claimed as doctrine, and that changed, right? And so it just really, my testimony kind of dissolved at that point, right? It really crumbled, and I was just having really a hard time because there are so many things in the church that I really loved, that I really valued, that I really wanted to keep as a part of my life. And so I kind of had to sift and sort through those things. And Kimberly helped me a lot through that time because she was helping me like see some of these things, because I could see what a deeply moral person she was, particularly, once we got through the teenage phase and stuff. There was a time, because she went to Disney World and did an internship in Florida at Disney World for a while. And I remember going and visiting her there. And we just had a really long talk about some decisions that she was making. And I could see what she was saying was true and good. And she was trying to be a good person and make good, solid decisions. And that, and just watching her and some of my other kids leave the church and still really try hard to be good people was really just shifted my mind and changed my mind a lot there. So
I think
sorry.
one of the big things for us was when I left the church, one of the things I told her was, I'm leaving the church because it doesn't match my morals. I'm trying to build certain values for myself. One of those values being love one another and accept people for who God made them to be. And the church wasn't helping me reach that potential, in my opinion. And I think that her being able to see that I was really trying to be a person with strong values, and that is why I was leaving the church, as opposed to somebody who just wanted to sin and go to the great and spacious building, then she was able to more understand me and see me for who I was and accept my decision.
Yeah, that was really important. Because I remember you saying that I could see that it just was not a position of integrity for you, that you felt like you were supposed to stand for truth and righteousness, and that meant that you had to tell your gay friends that they were doing wrong, which I don't think is actually true. I don't think that that's what I don't think that that's true doctrine, but that was how you felt in high school, was that the church was encouraging you to, make sure people that knew that this way of life was wrong.
So where we are now is we have a relationship that's built on some values and principles that we've come to together, kind of learning them on our own, but then also discussing them with one another so that we can have a relationship from both sides of the faith divide.
Yeah. And that's kind of our tagline on our podcast, is that we call it reconstructing your family after they deconstructed their faith, and having conversations from both sides of the faith divide. So yeah, one of the first. Oh, did you want to say something?
Just
Sorry.
keep talking. I'll share some comments later.
Okay, but if you want to jump in at anything, just give us
keep
a
sharing.
sign. Okay. One of the things that I really learned from Jody Moore, and Kimberly kind of learned this on her own, and I don't know how, because she didn't learn it from me, but how to just take responsibility for your own emotional maturity, to take care of your own emotional needs, because in the church, I think we're kind of taught that we need to be taking care of each other, and that means that we shouldn't take care of ourselves. And so as moms in the church, sometimes we get really resentful that people aren't taking care of us the way that we, aren't taking. And it's not like we're being selfish. Like, these are actual needs that we have emotionally, to need to be seen and to be valued and to be accepted and to be appreciated. And I learned, through life coaching, how to appreciate to give myself that kind of validation. And so then I wasn't constantly coming to a relationship with, like, I need you to tell me I'm a good mom, right?
I think that's something that a lot of parents in and out of the church do, is sometimes when you criticize them, they say, well, I must be the worst mom, or I must be the worst dad. And I think that it really helped when you stopped doing that and were able to fill your own needs enough that when we did have criticisms or we did have hurts that we needed to discuss with you, you could hear them and you could actually repair with us.
Yeah. And then, part of that was taking ownership for mistakes that I made, like things that I did that were hurtful. But it's hard to take responsibility for that until you realize, okay, I'm a good person that did some bad things, right? Because a lot of times we think we're just trying to prove that we were a good person. So that's why I think that's why moms say that. Like, I must have just been a terrible mom, because it's like, okay, look at me. Like, I did some good things too. But I think, like Kimberly said before, and maybe you'll agree with me, I don't know, but that that when I can take responsibility for my mistakes and not come to her just needing her to always to tell me that I'm a good mom, then it's easier for her to see the things that I did. Once her hurts are seen, then it's easier for her to,
appreciate you and see you
yeah,
as a good mom.
yeah,
I think that that's what's important in relationship building is I think that each person wants to feel their thing is heard, right? Your thing being, I really tried really hard to be a good mom. And I promise I cared about being a good mom to you. And my thing being, this thing that you did really hurt me and really affected my life. And I need to have resolution to it. And those two things can't exist at the same time. You have to give space to one before the other can come in. And my parents were wonderful parents in a lot of ways. And it's so much easier when we can discuss the mistakes to be able to focus on all of the good that existed.
yeah. And I appreciate that too. So then the second one, I kind of goes along with that, but that we try to create emotional safety for each other, right? If you can get to a place where you're meeting your own emotional needs, none of us can meet all of our own emotional needs, and it's good that we can take care of each other. But about 70-80% of the time, if you can take care of yourself, like I like to think about it like feeding each other, because when you have children, you don't expect them to feed you, right? When you have a baby, you just expect that you're going to have to take care of all of their needs for food. And then as they grow, that they can kind of start feeding themselves. And then as they get a little older, then they can, make themselves a grilled cheese sandwich and make you a grilled cheese sandwich too, right? And we can share that. But it's a very long time before your children are able to buy their own food, cook their own food, and meet their own needs. And so if we're expecting them to do that for us, before they're able to do that, we need to make sure that we're taking care of their needs. We need to make sure that we're meeting those, that we're feeding them. And yeah, and I love that metaphor too, because even when we are completely capable of taking care of ourselves, it's still nice to go to go to lunch together. I'd love to. Kimberly lives on the other side of the world, but on the other side of the country, but I wish I could take her to lunch more often. But it's still nice to meet each other's needs in that way too, and we still do that. So
I think really what it is leaving room for each other to not be perfect. And I think that has grown our relationship and our understanding of one another. For example, my mom was struggling at one point to understand the trans community. And at that point, I felt like I had more of an understanding and appreciation and was more involved with trans people. And she came to me with some of the things that she was thinking and some of the things that she had heard. And we discussed it a little bit. And I said, well, do you know any trans people? And she didn't at that time. And I suggested, why don't you follow some trans people on social media? And I think that as you get to know someone and understand what they're actually like, then you can be able to see that community as valid, and you can see who the people are behind the identity and understand that identity better. And I think that if we had been in a position where we couldn't speak about that, or if we were constantly at odds about that, or if I judged her when she came to me for not being at the spot that I was with understanding that we wouldn't have been able to grow in that way.
yeah. Well, and that's the next one that we had on the list was humility and understanding, just being willing to see where you might be wrong. Actually, that wasn't the next one. The next one that we had was trusting the good in each other. But I think we've talked quite a bit about that. That just being willing to see all of the good that the other person does. Because there's good in everybody. There really is. We're all trying to be good people and trying to do what's right. And if we're in a season of our life that we're not trying to do that, it's probably because there's a lot of hurt and anger and pain going on. And to try to see the good underneath all of that. But yeah, like being able to recognize that you might be wrong. Like we all think we're right all of the time. and a lot of the time we're like, it's easy to see when other people are wrong, but it's really hard to see when you are wrong yourself. And so I think that's been important.
Yeah. And the last thing that we really value and that we have focused on is intentionality, which is that we both come to this relationship knowing that we want to have this relationship and that we want to create a good family dynamic together.
Yeah.
And I think that our constant want for that and our constant recommitment to that makes it that even now when we have arguments or we have difficult times or we have points where we feel like we just really can't find an agreement, we give each other the space and grace and we give ourselves the patience to come back to that commitment and find a way through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that intentionality too is just to enjoy each other's company, right? And particularly in times where we're where we're disagreeing on a lot of things, right? It's important to still plan things together and still try to connect with each other on a level, whatever level that can be, even if it's just just having fun together, just playing a board game or whatever, but trying to continue to keep that connection and continue to be in relationship with each other while you figure the rest of it out.
Something that works really well for us because we're all spread out. I'm in New York. I have siblings in Arizona and Idaho, all over. We do a family Zoom call every Sunday night. It's at the same time every Sunday. We've been doing it for almost a decade now. And it's just a good spot to say, hey, we're going to consistently do this, show up or don't, depending on how you're feeling that day. And we'll just try to chat and have a good time together, so we don't forget about one another and forget what we like about one another.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could have everybody over for dinner on Sunday nights, but this is kind of the next best thing.
Until teleportation exists.
Yes. And I really look forward to that. But yeah, so that's kind of our story. We talked a lot.
People want to hear you talk, and so thank you. I wrote down some things, listeners. Maybe you wrote down some things. I sometimes start with the beginning, and I'm going to start with the end because these 5 things I thought were just terrific principles. Take responsibility for your own stuff. Number 2, create emotional safety. Number 3, trust the good in each other. Number 4, humility. And number 5, intentionality. And those are just awesome principles to keep the family circle together. And the way you role model that. So that's the power of your stories. You're not just telling us what might work. You're showing how this works in real life in the Bates family. Mm-hmm. And then this Zoom call on Sunday night, it seems not to be required. No one's keeping score. I love the way you framed it, if you can. And but you probably care about everybody equally, even if everybody can't join. I just love that. And there's just so many nuggets. Now I'll go back to kind of the beginning. Like as Kimberly was sharing her story in high school, I just got really tenderhearted for you, Kimberly. Yeah. And even though I can't apologize for your ward or for the church, it just as a friend in Salt Lake City, I'm sorry for everything that happened to you in high school. You're a good person doing the best you could. You didn't do anything wrong in any of these things, and you got judged by our culture for not fitting in this really kind of narrow box sometimes. And your attributes and your gifts were broader than that box, including interracial dating, which is totally cool with the church. But you're in a culture where, people are going to raise their eyebrows or point to something that somebody said. And you seem very informed when you said it was all rolled back in 1994. So you sound like someone who's done a lot of homework to understand where the church is on a lot of these issues. So I'm just sorry for, that cultural not fitting in and judgment that you felt. And there's probably, I wouldn't just say you left the church over cultural issues. I think you left the church partly over doctrinal issues.
Mhm.
And I validate that too, where, really good people are not comfortable with some parts of our doctrine, especially around LGBTQ, where we were with blacks in the priesthood, where we were with women. So there's really valid reasons people leave the church, really good people. And I couldn't talk like that 10 years ago if I hadn't walked this road with my children. I've been through a faith journey, but still stay in the church. But I could
Mhm.
certainly relate to the journey you've both walked. And I love that you just said my values didn't align with the church. That's kind of jarring for us as church members that somebody could come to that conclusion, but it's the reality for really good people at times. And I just acknowledge that. And so, I'm sorry for all that backlash you got. And I love the way you've made your life forward and are living your life based on your values and doing really good things as we talk professionally and with people before we record. So
Thank you so
good
much.
soul, Kimberly.
And I do just want to add, well, it doesn't make it okay, the judgment that happens. I also have so many people from my ward that were just wonderful and still are in my heart today. Like the church does have really wonderful people as well.
Good soul. And sometime, well, I'll come back to that concept. Then, Kari, you were super brave with just being broke me for a while. Three children left the church kind of maybe at the same time or in a short period of time. And just, holy cow, this is like, for our family, especially for my wife, I don't know if it's harder on women in general than men, or it was a little bit more in our family. My wife maybe had spent more time with the kids growing up, or her self-worth might have been tied a little bit more into the kids' outcome. That can be different, in each family, but my wife, really good people feel the same way you do. And I felt a lot of this too is just, holy cow, either what did we do wrong? Um, or, what's happening here? And we didn't have a lot of answers in our faith communities, not a lot of support for that. There's kind of, we're a little more silent. We can't, if you have a broken arm or working through a health issue, you can really turn to your faith community. But some of this you're processing completely silently. I love that you found Jody Moore and all these resources. Um, Talk about your testimony crumbling. If listeners are sort of in this, because I think you're in the church, talk about sort of
Yeah.
that journey of like my testimony crumbled, but I'm still in the church. For those that are trying to still make the church work.
Um, I I think that I had to give up the idea of infallibility and the idea of um like the church having all of the truth, all that it was this complete package of this is, you know, specific instructions to live your life. And if you live your life this way, it will be perfect. Like I I really think that we have this idea that the church is a cheat code. At least I did for sure. That if you do these things that you won't ever have hard things happen to you. And your family will look this certain way and your posterity will all stay in the church um and that just became very clearly not true in my life, right? That and the first part of that was just, well, then I've done it wrong, right? Like somewhere. And you know in the church it's easy to find something that you've done wrong, right? Because there's so many things to do right. And so, was it that I didn't do my genealogy? Did we not go to the temple enough? All of those kinds of things. And then I think when I started to understand that and look at it, like we really, really did try hard. I mean, we certainly weren't perfect, but it was absolutely our priority to make sure that we stayed in the church and stayed a part of and did all of the things. Yeah, and so that just kind of went away for me, and now there are some really beautiful. My testimony is more based on like really beautiful things that I want to believe. I want to believe in eternal families. I want to believe in a heavenly Father and Mother that love us. I want to believe in a Savior who suffers with us when we suffer, because of the love that He feels for us. And so, and I want to believe that Heavenly Father communicates with us, that He tries to communicate with us through the Spirit and through prophets, even when prophets make terrible mistakes, as we see in all of the scriptures and in our modern day prophets in the past. And so I've just had to really open space for that fallibility, and for the idea that we're just kind of good people stumbling towards the truth, stumbling towards our trying to figure out what our Heavenly Father's will is and to do it. So
That's great. I've got the mowers mowing the neighbor's yard, listeners. So if you hear mowers in the background, they come once a week, and I swear it's always during a podcast.
Of course.
That was a great answer, Kari, and just appreciate your vulnerability. And some of our listeners call that deconstruction and kind of reconstruction in a way. I just think there's a lot of models for those of us that want to stay in the church and really feel called to stay in the church. And yours is a valid, authentic model of just sort of deconstructing, reconstructing, and use the word hope a lot instead of no. And there should be no shame in somebody that says hope, believe versus no. And just recognize we're all doing the best we can in individual journeys. So just credit for you just still trying to make the church work, knowing the complexities and having kids out of the church. And so any more you want to add right there?
Just that I love the idea of building Zion, and I think that this is the work of it, right? Like that's, there's a podcaster recently that said something about that, nobody's willing to die for the church anymore. And I thought, I can't think of a single doctrine in the church that I would be willing to die for. But the idea of Zion, the idea of our relationships and taking care of each other, that I would be willing to give my life for.
Sometimes I wonder if this whole process, because if every family's kind of growing up in the church and we're all the same and everybody stays in the church and everybody stays kind of in this world where we're a lot the same politically and religiously, I've wondered, and you go through this, what a therapist described to me as the storming period, kids leaving the church. It's like, it's a storming period. It's dealing with the new reality and reconstructing a family relationship like you've so beautifully done. But some sort of say to me, and maybe this is our own family, our whole communication tools have significantly increased. These last 5 things you went through, I've wondered if you both feel like, this is painful, but this has actually brought our family to a different place of vulnerability, acceptance, of just a way that we're actually closer together as a family, even though it's been kind of difficult. Do you either want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we were preparing for what we were going to say, we kind of talked about some of the fights that we had over the years. And including one, I mean, not to air too much, but there was a time that we were preparing for one of my cousin's wedding, and my mom looked at me and she's like, "I'm just so sad that you will never have a beautiful temple marriage." And that just hurt so much at the time. And we had this huge, huge fight over it. And it was so painful. Like, there's no way to make that a prettier process. I don't think so. And I would absolutely go through it again to get where we are, and also to build the resilience that we have, because I know that my mom might say an offhand comment to me again, or I might say something to her, or I might say something that hurts her. But we have the resilience that we love each other enough, and we're going to go back to the basics and understanding one another and giving each other the chance and expressing the humility to build with love with one another.
And forgiving each other.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah. That is something from the church that I do carry and I do love, is just this idea of radical forgiveness, of turn the other cheek, to forgive over and over again, just because I think none of us are perfect and we all try so hard. And I think we're all deserving of forgiveness, and I think it's necessary for all of us.
I love that you a lot of times will say that everybody deserves the space and grace to grow. And I appreciate so much that you've given me that space, because I'm still growing and I'm still learning, and
The mowers are loud. I've been pressing mute.
It's okay.
Here's a tender question, Kimberly. Do you want your mom to leave the church?
No.
Why?
And I really appreciate you asking that, because I think when I first left the church, there is a lot of anger when you first leave. I've watched my other siblings who have left go through it, that you feel manipulated, you feel anger, you feel like this is a bad organization. But I think because I've had a decade of being out of the church and being able to view the church through different lenses, I can see where, for me, it didn't help me live to my values the best that I can. But I can see the work that my mom does, and I can see that for her, it's helping her live her values. I know that it gives her a community where she can serve and where she can be loving and be an example to others. And I know that it gives her renewed faith and renewed hope for life and her journey through this life. And I know on top of that, it's just a deeply personal thing for her. And it is something that is close to her heart and always has been. And I don't want to disrespect something so close to her heart. I think that there is a place where I can respect a religion that I disagree with. Like, I'm not going to let it impact my life or dictate what I do. But things as simple as, can we have a family prayer, or her expressing her faith to me, that doesn't infringe on my life. And it's an honor to be able to respect what she appreciates and loves.
That was a beautiful second. It was just full of grace. Thank you, Kimberly. You're awesome.
Thank you.
She is awesome.
And I may have had my mute button on. Sorry, listeners, you may not have heard my last comment. I just said that was awesome, Kimberly.
Thank you.
We heard you.
You two heard me.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of our family journey a little bit. My wife spoke at BYU Women's Conference this last spring about this very subject, and she had like 2,000 people in the audience, and she spoke about being a mom of adult children that have made decisions to leave the church, and she had that venue was packed. I think I just said 2,000 or 3,000 people were there, but she had two of our kids on the front row. One, and 4 of our kids don't go to church and 2 do. And she had one that doesn't go to church and one that did go to church on the front row. And they both just loved her presentation. And one of the things she did that I thought was really remarkable is when one of our sons stepped away from the church, she did go out to lunch with him and just wanted to hear the story of why he left the church. He's a returned missionary married in the temple. And I admire her curiosity to do that. We're scared of those conversations. We worry it'll affect our testimony or our shelf, or we'll have to deal with the cognitive dissonance or change our worldview or our story. But I think that's part of preserving the relationship. And this son of ours was so glad to be there, to hear his mom talking about supporting kids that have left the church, and he was not triggered by her comments. She went to each of our kids and asked what she could share from them. So she created this boundaries that you've talked about is, what can I share at BYU Women's Conference about your story? What would you like them to know? Is it okay if I talk anything about you? And when we're in their home, she's just done a really good job of just like you are, Kari, of focusing on the common values. Our job is to preserve the relationship. We can't control the outcome. And she is a very traditional believing member. I'm more nuanced. I've always been a little more nuanced. As you may know, listeners, when I was dating my wife in the late 80s at BYU, I had this big secret I had to tell her, and that I'm politically left center, and she is not. And that hasn't changed in our marriage. We're in a mixed political marriage, and at this point, we don't want to change each other. We think it's the strength of our marriage, and we're not trying to keep score of which kid ends up more like dad or more like mom. We've learned to turn off cable news because most of that is fear-based, fear-mongering about the other side, but we stay very informed on political issues through fact-based sources that aren't demonizing the other side. And so much of that political world is like that. So if my wife woke up one morning and said she thought like me politically, I think I'd be disappointed. And so we've tried to model. I've loved the idea that Zion is not sameness anymore. This goes back to what Kari's talking about, Zion. I grew up, and this word is in your outline. How do you say that word, Kari? Ideal?
Idyllic.
I can't say it. Yes, you knew it. Idyllic. I can never say that word. I grew up in a world that we're all the same, and that idyllic. Late 70s and 80s in Salt Lake City, and I thought Zion was sameness. Everybody I knew was straight. No women worked. We all lived in the same Rambler type houses. There were only white people around, probably everybody was conservative. I was starting to become a closeted non-conservative in those days. But Zion to me is what is going on in the Bates family. It's unity in purpose, and it's unity in values, and it's not sameness, and it's beautiful. And it's a beautiful family love story that the two of you are role modeling in your podcast. And I talk about Apollo 13 a lot of times on this podcast, where that's the episode, that's the mission that didn't make it to the moon, which represents, kids leaving the church, and you have plan B. You're just trying to, save the astronauts. It's a bigger purpose than getting to the moon. Let's get these astronauts back to Earth alive, and things are going sideways. And Gene Kratz, that mission commander in Houston, as they're coming through the atmosphere, it says, in the moment of most despair, he says, this is going to be our finest hour. And I love that. And this, in some ways, is the Bates' family's most difficult hour, but it's the finest hour. And I feel that about the Osler family as we've walked this road with having adult children leave the church. And it's been jarring, but it's been perhaps some of the most painful time. But I think it's, especially with my wife, I think it's been her finest hour. One of the things I think about on this subject is, what could the church do to take away some of this pain? Should we start talking about, dear parents, it's likely statistically that as your kids age up, some of them are going to leave the church. This is how you should feel. You shouldn't feel like you've failed, or it's just part of agency. Our theology actually allows space for Kimberly to choose the path she feels is right for her, and us to sort of support that and say, we're going to leave this at the feet of our heavenly parents and our Savior, and our theology allows for progression. And so I'm not sure, I don't know to go down too much the theology. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on this idea of what could we, I don't try to get in the business of telling our church what they should do, but I would love to eliminate the pain so that parents and our culture are better prepared for this and sort of accept this as a real possibility, and it's not a failure for a family. And I don't think talking about it causes more people like Kimberly to leave the church. I just think it helps the family stay together as there's more institutional support for this. So I don't know if either of you want to address that.
I'm going to chime in and say that the first thing that I would like to see is not blaming parents when the kids leave their church. I'm a very independent person. I made this choice independently, and it's not a reflection of my parents being too strict or not strict enough or not having the right things to say. They're lovely people who are devoted to their church. And I get defensive sometimes and get worried that they are looked down on in their own community because their kids have left.
Thank you. That's really kind. I think for me, I think what's interesting is that I feel like it's such a loss to the church, right? Like the people that we're losing, we just did a podcast where for our last two of the season, I'm trying to talk her into coming back to the church and she's trying to talk me into leaving the church. But I just feel like it's such a loss to our community if people think bigger and differently and we push them out. That to me is, and I think that it is changing. I really do. I don't think that the church is the same church that Kimberly left, really. I think that there's a lot more openness. But I think we still have a ways to go of just recognizing that, you know what, this work isn't done until all of God's children are home and safe and part of their family, part of our Heavenly Parents' family. And if that's what we believe this is, I had a quote written down from you that was something along the lines of that we are called to be gatherers, not sifters, right? That this, that Heavenly Father's work is with all of his children, whether they're in this church or in a different church or in no church at all. Like the God that I have to believe in loves every one of his children and will never be content until every one of his children have met their potential, whatever that ends up being, so.
Really good stuff. And as I listened to stories of people who left the church, Kimberly's age roughly, and they wish, and you don't need this advice, Kari, but perhaps a listener does this, is learned to see people, not if they're in or out of the church, but what they're doing in their life. So we've talked about Kimberly's career online, but we spent a bit of time talking before we went live, and you have this incredible career in this exciting city of New York. You come from a small town in Idaho and Nevada. In the East Coast, they say Nevada, or they always mispronounce it. But you've come from, and what you're doing, you're in the big city of Manhattan in a big, huge company in a really important HR job. And that's just an incredible accomplishment. I don't know what it's like to get off the plane in New York and wonder, do I belong here? Can I make it here? I don't know how scared you were, but now look at what you've done and the accomplishment. And so I think we've tried to really see our kids, not if they're in or out of the church. That's part of their story. That's true. I'm not dismissing that or putting my head in the sand, but we're really trying to see our kids for what they're accomplishing in their lives, the good people that they are. And some of our kids struggle that are in the church, and some of our kids struggle that are out of the church. But we're not trying to link that to being in the church or not being in the church as much. It's just part of the mortal experience. And so we don't look at our kids out of the church that struggle and might open up to us and say, well, maybe your mental health would be better if you stayed in the church, or maybe your financial situation would stay better in the church. It'd be easy to say that, and you two would never do that, or maybe you did that at the beginning, but it's sort of what I would call spiritual manipulation, and it's transactional relationship. And we're trying to just love people because they deserve to be loved, not because their love will bring them back to the church, but because they're children of heavenly parents, and their identity. We believe in the theology of our church is divine in nature and incredible people, and they deserve to be loved. Our heavenly parents love them, and we can model that. I also believe nothing we can do can take us outside of God's love. So I think we should role model that as parents, that our love is not conditional or not transactional. Now, if there's abuse there, there's situations where a kid will get into drugs and alcohol, and be stealing from the house and impacting the possibility for other kids. So there's boundaries you have to develop at some point as parents if you get in really tough situations like that. But obviously, Kimberly's not dealing drugs and stealing from the home and breaking down the house and stuff like that. So just more thoughts that come to your mind in a closing segment or two. Anything else you'd love to share?
No, I really appreciate what you said, because that's what is most important to me with my relationship with my parents, is that they love me and see me for who I am and not for my potential within the church. I think that my mom always, like you said, talks to my accomplishments and doesn't talk to the sadness of me leaving the church when she's asked about me. And that really helps our relationship.
It's just exhausting to be sad all the time that you left the church. Like I feel like I did that for a while, and it's just not fun to be miserable forever, and there's no reason for it, right? Because you're amazing, and it's fun to watch the life that you're living, even if it's a different life than I've lived. So
It's great. And my mic may have been off for the recording. You two heard what I said, but I if it went pause, I just said, let's see people for what they're accomplishing. Let's don't make our love transactional that, I'll love you, and let's just love people for who they are. And if people out of the church get in a tough spot, let's don't think that that's because they left the church or this is our card to get them back in the church by playing up a tough financial situation or a mental health issue or something that's gone wrong in their life. People's have tough experiences in the church and out of the church, and that's what I would call spiritual manipulation. Let's just love people where they are and let them self-determine their best path forward. My friend Calvin Burke, a gay Latter-day Saint, is the one who coined that term for me. We're called to be gatherers or sifters. So I love that you referenced that. I want to give Calvin a shout out. And one of the other things I've read recently is that about 50% of young women are leaving the church. And I'm interested in data. I think it's our friend to help us understand what we need to address. And sometimes that data we want to dismiss, or I read an editorial in one of the local papers that said, well, that's just the world is just getting secular, so of course people would leave our church. And I don't disagree with that, but it sort of prevents us from looking inward and saying, what can we do better? It's not just secular. It's sort of like, it's going back to Kimberly's experience. What could we do better? I love looking inward and just saying, what are our unforced errors, to use a tennis term, or what can we do, especially to improve the culture, which is something more in our control as rank and file members. And I'm certainly open to policy or doctrinal changes that improve the experience for others. So I think data is our friend, and I think sometimes it's okay to look at the data and just say, we need to do better too. It's not just a sign of the last days that people are leaving the church. It's not just, sometimes we have these stories where we want everything to fit our existing story. And sometimes it's good to be curious, like Kari's role modeling with Kimberly, and Kimberly has done in her own life. And I kept my mic from being mute. Sorry. So anyway, we're kind of at the end, but anything else either of you'd like to share?
Can't think of anything. Just come listen to our podcast.
Yeah. And I appreciate the work that you're doing and that your wife, you mentioned, was doing, and what you're doing in your own family. I think that this is great work to do.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Kari. Once again, we'll put Kari Bates' Instagram account. It's Kari Bates Family Coach. You can remember, that's not too hard to remember. It's just 4 words stuck together for an Instagram account. Kari, Kari Bates. You can spell family coaching. Coach, singular. We'll put that in our Instagram account, so you can DM Kari if you'd like to just connect with her content. You can see her podcast there. And if you want to help just with her help as a life coach, it's something she's willing to do. We'll link to the podcast, so listen to their episodes. I love that you're just doing this together. I love that you named it Coffee and Cocoa. That's kind of ironic and well named. And I think a little insight into the word of wisdom where you both are with that. So I just think that's terrific. So Kimberly Bates from New York and Kari Bates from Elko, Nevada, thank you for joining us. And you two are great, just role modeling what Christ invited us to do, which love our neighbors as ourselves. And this is
Thank
Richard
you so
Ostler
much.
signing off on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.